Welcome to WonderPod. WonderPod is the official podcast of WonderFest, Ireland's first online children's book festival. I'm your host, Conor Braden. In this podcast, we'll be discussing everything there is to talk about with children's books. I'll be talking with Ireland's top writers, illustrators, publishers, agents, and more. You can find out more about WonderFest by heading to wonderfest.ie. Now, on with the show. Hello all you wonderful people, and welcome to episode 7 of WonderPod. This week I'm getting to talk to Katrina Sweeney and Rob Grant about their books A Galway Fairy Tale and The Philosophy Resistance Squad. Robert Grant is from Waterford and has a PhD in philosophy from Trinity College Dublin. Rob is a founder of the Philosophy in the Community project and a member of Philosophy Ireland, and he has taught philosophy in Trinity College Dublin, as well as schools, prisons, community centres, and loads of other places. He has written and talked about this work for the Irish Times, for RT Radio, for television, for BBC Radio, and so much more. And The Philosophy Resistance Squad is his first book for children. Katrina Sweeney is an illustrator and artist living and working in Dublin, but she spent most of her childhood holidays roaming around her granddad's small farm in the west of Ireland. West of Ireland is the best part of Ireland, just so you know. This instilled in her an appreciation and curiosity in weather, the seasons, community, and all things handmade and tactile, and she loves tools and hands and the implements that make them. These are the things she tries to capture in her work the most, and A Galway Fairy Tale is Katrina's first time writing a children's book. I won't lie, but this, more than most episodes, was the episode I was looking forward to recording the most. And I think that's because Rob and Katrina are, to me, the next stage in my writing journey that I'm trying to get to. The author that has their first traditionally published book out there. I just loved getting to talk to Rob and Katrina about how they got to where they are, so I'm delighted to get to share this chat with you now. So, let's go. Hello and welcome to WonderPod. Rob and Katrina, how are both of you doing today?
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, it's
looking forward to the chat.
Good, because it's going to be a good one, I swear. It's great to get you on because the audience, the people listening to this are mostly other aspiring children's writers. So it's really exciting to get people on that have just become published or just debut authors, and we'll get to talk to our audience on that. So the first is, maybe we'll start with yourself, Rob. Could you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, so my book is called The Philosophy Resistance Squad. And it's a story about a group of kids who get accepted into this very prestigious school, and they're all super proud and excited. But it turns out that everything is not as it seems, and actually the school is run by this kind of tyrannical, crazy headmaster called Dr. Finnegas Pummelcrush, and he has a secret plan to brainwash all these kids and turn them into kind of mindless, unthinking robot drones. And so throughout the story, anyway, the kids discover philosophy, and there's this old philosophy teacher in the school, and she's the school gardener, and she starts doing philosophy with the kids, and this really opens up their minds and their hearts, and this turns out kind of protects them from the brainwashing, and they go and they save their friends and stuff like that. So it's a fun kind of adventure story, but it also is a way to introduce philosophy and philosophical ideas to kids through dialogue. So yeah, that's kind of the rough pitch of what it's all about.
That's excellent. And out of curiosity, just, is it a chapter book or a middle grade? What age range is it?
Yeah, it's middle grade fiction, so it's aimed at kids around 9 to 12 years old. But of course, those kind of categories, it depends on the kid themselves and what they're interested in.
Speaking from experience, children do not like to be put in categories as much as we try.
No, yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah. And so, Katrina, now, this is interesting. You're a debut author, but this isn't your first children's book. So first, can you tell us a little bit your own background in children's books, and then tell us a bit about A Galway Fairy Tale?
Yeah, that's right, Rob. So I've actually illustrated three books, before this. Two were self-publishers, and one was a small publisher who she published books kind of to make education more inclusive for people with special educational needs like autism or deafness. But yeah, no, this book is it's the fourth book I've illustrated, but it's my first one to have written as well. So it's A Galway Fairy Tale is the name of it, and it's a contemporary take on the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale, and it's set in modern day Galway. So it's about brother and sister Sean and Grania. They could be twins because I've made them the same height. And they set out to Galway Market to buy a birthday present for their mom's birthday. So they want to buy her a claddagh ring because it's Galway. And they take some brown soda bread, which their dad has baked for their snack. And along the way, they pass locations like, you know, Spanish Arch, Salmon Weir Bridge, Eyre Square, and they meet a fisherman, a pirate queen, and a knight. And they share. I won't go into this now; it's in the book. But they share their soda bread with them and end up leaving a trail of breadcrumbs all around Galway City. And then there's a sweet shop owner, a wicked witch, who she really wants the ring, the claddagh ring, and she wants to steal it off them. So the friends that they've made along the way, the characters leap to their rescue, and as they make their escape, and they don't know where they are in Galway City, but they follow the breadcrumbs all the way back home in time for their mom's birthday party.
That's really interesting. So, Rob, could you tell us, like, what exactly inspired you to start writing the Philosophy Resistance Squad? Because it is there's a couple of books I can remember from my own childhood that kind of like, oh, it's kind of like this, but with a bit of that and a bit of this and a lot of philosophy. So what is it that inspired you to write it?
Yeah, well, my background is in philosophy. I did my undergrad and I did the PhD in philosophy here in Dublin, and I've been kind of teaching philosophy for the past few years. And I got involved in trying to promote philosophy in schools. And I suppose that came out of a frustration that I think a lot of people feel with their education system, and how there's not much space in our education system for kids to question the ideas that they receive.
Preaching to the choir here, Rob, don't worry.
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, primary school is quite progressive in that sense in comparison to secondary school, I think. But still, you know, like, I mean, this is well-trodden ground here in Ireland in terms of our public conversations, but there's definitely a overemphasis on kind of memorization and rote learning, and even just the kind of atmosphere of school being one in which there's one authority figure and they dictate the terms of what is worth knowing and what is worth talking about, and they're the person to be listened to. And, you know, the voice of the child gets kind of lost, and kids are, you know, they just become very used to receiving information without ever acting on it and without ever having space to express themselves and create their own kind of meaning in a back and forth, say, between adults or between each other. So out of that frustration, then I kind of saw philosophy as one little way that we could start to change that dynamic, because it is on principle very committed to the idea that you should question the ideas that you receive. You should think for yourself, you should think critically, you should listen to other perspectives, you should be open to the possibility that the world is not exactly how it seems to you. And I think philosophy it's not just about kind of rigor and analysis and logic, it's also about imagination and creativity and thinking of ways things could be different. So I went into some schools and I started teaching in schools with kids, and I ended up making a documentary for RTE a few years ago that kind of made these arguments, you know, like made a critique of education and suggested philosophy as a way that we could start to change that. So I interviewed Michael D. Higgins, who's a big fan of this stuff, was in it, and a few other people, Lenny Abramson and Luke O'Neill, and also I kind of filmed some kids. Educate Together and Balbriggan were in it actually too, actually doing philosophy. So a friend of mine, Grania Clear, who works in publishing, she was with Little Island at the time, and she saw the program and she suggested, why don't we do a book for kids? And I think the original idea was supposed to be maybe a kind of an encyclopedia where you explain philosophical ideas, maybe the classics like Plato, Aristotle, whoever else, to kids. But I kind of felt that had been done, so I wanted to take a little different approach. I wanted to, first of all, try to make it a bit fun and entertaining, but also stay true to the principles of doing philosophy with children, which is not to lecture them on ideas, but to invite them to think for themselves. And
yeah, because that idea of an encyclopedia or a dictionary or a like philosophy for kids book, like that does seem very, this is what philosophy is, which is basically what you're saying was what you were kind of trying to work against.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you know, like there's some great books like that, and they can be useful for people who want to do philosophy with kids, but they also can be, they have a tendency to maybe a little bit patronizing towards kids, I think, in the language they use and the assumption that they are deciding what's worthwhile. And so like the dialogues in the book take place with Milo Maloney, who's the kind of kid who gets in a bit of trouble and gets kicked out, and makes a connection with Ursula Joy, who's the philosophy teacher, and she sees something of a philosopher in his kind of troublesome nature. And you know, they talk about friendship, they talk about immortality, they talk about how we treat animals. So the dialogue starts from a place where kids already have invested in these kind of ideas. So it's not trying to impose you know, traditional philosophical ideas, but it's starting from where young people are already at and things that are meaningful for them, and trying to unpick those things. Like, is technology good for us, for example, is another one. And kids have a lot to say about that stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where it all came from.
I was saying to Rob before we were recording that I have actually done some philosophy with kids in the classroom myself, and like it's one of those things that I think one thing I really need everyone in the world to understand is that children are incredibly creative and intelligent, and if you are patronizing towards them, they shut down, they don't listen, they don't engage whatsoever. And it's something that if you don't work directly with kids, you mightn't necessarily believe me, but I've been teaching for 10 years now. I kind of know what I'm on about, you know, but it's like what you're saying. It's that they need to kind of explore and create and discuss and form new thoughts. So that's, and well done on not writing another, this is what this is for kids. Yeah. They have enough of those books. They're called textbooks.
Yeah.
So
no,
Katrina, you said earlier that you illustrated a few books. So what was it that, and I love the idea of a Galway fairy tale, and I'm going to assume
sounds great. Yeah,
it does. Yeah, I actually saw a few pages of it on the O'Brien website. They have the little preview, and I fell in love with the illustration style and the story. And now that I know it's a Hansel and Gretel allegory, I'm kind of like, oh wow. But what was it that made you go, oh, do you know what? I'm going to write one this time? Like, what was it that kind of put that into your head?
Yeah, Connor, it's a completely different way into it from Rob's.
But that's the thing, there's so many different ways into writing, and that's why we have so many different guests.
Yeah. I actually never thought I would write a children's book. Illustration was my way into it. But you know, looking back now, I can see my illustrations are very narrative, and I do like to tell a story through my illustrations. But really what happened with me was I went to one of the publishers' open submission nights. So it was an O'Brien open submission night. They have them every year around kind of culture night time, so end of September, October. So like it is, I really recommend to anyone who's interested in writing or illustrating to go to any of those open submissions, you know. So it indirectly came about from me going along to that. I had an idea for a completely different story, which I don't know if I'll say it here, it's still kind of in gestation, but it's about Sybil Connolly, who was a fashion designer in Dublin in the 1950s. Nobody's ever heard of her. Like, I can't believe she's just disappeared from our history. Like, she employed 150 women in Ireland at a time when we were so economically depressed, like in the 1950s. Plus I love textiles and fashion and all that, so I just really want to illustrate it as well. But when I went to the submission night, they saw my illustrations, and I'd done a little dummy book or a zine, a kind of version of the Sybil Connolly story, and they as an aside, they recommended that I email my illustrations into their art director. So I did that, and she got in touch with me and asked me to come in and show her my work. So I went in with my portfolio case, dusted it off. I hadn't used it like in 10 years, because everything is online now. So it's amazing to actually still have to show, show your hard copies of illustrations in a portfolio case. But so it was actually through that. She said to me, she could see my illustrations were quite narrative and that they were kind of quite Irish as well, that she got an Irish feel of it. And beforehand, I would have felt slightly embarrassed about that because I felt like it wasn't trendy, but yeah, but like it's kind of, I kind of learned from it, like to kind of stick to what you're interested in and what you just do you, I suppose, and eventually somebody somewhere will resonate with it. So that's how it came about, that I wrote a fairy tale, a modern day fairy tale.
That's excellent. And that's one thing I think that particularly for illustrators that I've heard of O'Brien doing it, and I'm sure other publishers do, both Irish and international. But if they have a particular illustrator, they mightn't take you on the project you pitch them on, but they will say, I like your style and I'm going to ask you to apply it to this. And sometimes, and that's the thing, Sarah Webb's going to be very proud of me when I say this, if you're an author and you want to submit a picture book, you don't need to have illustrations when you submit it. Because what publishers will often do is, let's say, Rob, you write a picture book about a kid finding a rock, and then he uses his philosophical skills to pretend it's lots of different things. Yeah. And they, publishers might take Rob's text and go, do you know what? Katrina Sweeney could do an amazing job of these illustrations, and they'll pair together the story and the illustrator they think will work. So it sounds
like we should do it.
Yeah, sure. As long as I get a 50% commission on sales because I inspired you. So what happened then? Like, so you both kind of said you started coming up with the idea. I mean, Rob, you had a friend approach you and say, let's do a philosophy book for kids. Katrina, O'Brien approached you and said, hey, do you ever think about doing a narrative? So how long did it take then from the initial, here's what I think I'll do, to having the finished manuscript? We'll start with yourself, Katrina.
Yeah, so it's a little bit longer than what most people realize. Like it's a year in the making, from the roughs, the drafting it out, storyboarding, editing, and then doing the finished. I would say to write and illustrate a book, it's a year. So it's a long enough process.
Yeah. And it's so frustrating because then everything we write is read so quickly. Someone could read something in 20 minutes, especially if it's a picture book. It could be very quick. And you're like, that's a year of my life you just blitzed through. So Rob, what's it like then writing a middle grade book then, in contrast? Like, did it take you a year, or was it more, or was it less?
I'd say it was a little bit longer. I'd say it was about a year and a half, from like kind of the original idea to like the finished last draft submitted. But it was kind of a funny process. I mean, I was lucky in one sense in that like I had met the publisher and they suggested the idea, so I didn't have to like kind of shop it around. But at the same time, I was kind of untested. I mean, I had done different types of writing for newspapers and academic stuff, but I had never written for kids. So we were both kind of feeling each other out for a few months, and I had to submit some ideas, first of all, about like how would I want this to look, and that involved a little bit of persuading because they wanted a kind of a hardback, nicely designed encyclopedia style philosophy book, and I wanted to do the kind of narrative story. So I had to win them over on that. So that was one little hurdle I had to jump. And then, I was working with them from that point on the story, and I think they had to rein me in a couple of times. Like one of my original ideas had, the garden was actually a portal to a different dimension where there was these like alien philosophical beings, and it was a cosmic battle for open-mindedness going on. And they were like, maybe just like leave it to the school story.
Tone it down.
Yeah, that's quite enough for now. So yeah, and once we kind of agreed on how the book would look, it was probably about a year then of actually kind of writing it, and going back and forth, I would say. So it's an intense process for sure.
Yeah. So both of you came from a kind of a different to the norm, in the sense that you kind of were with the publisher first before you had the manuscript, really. Would that be right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I never thought of that, Connor. Yeah, that's true.
That's really unusual. Yeah.
Yeah. But it just shows how organic, like, the whole process can be. You know, it's not it's not the same route for everybody, and it's not one right way, I suppose, to do it.
Yeah, no, exactly. So when did either of you have an agent then at any point? Like, is that something you pursued when you were starting out? I mean, Katrina, I'm sure you had an agent because you had a couple of books before.
Yeah, no, Connor, it's funny. Like years ago, like 10 years ago, when I tried, became freelance self-employed illustrator, I bought the Writers and Artists Yearbook, the big thick encyclopedia tome, and I was really like good in selecting the agents and publishers that I thought my work would fit with, and I sent away and never heard back from any of them at all. Okay. Yes, that was like 10 years ago. And I know this comes up a lot about agents for illustration anyway. It's very kind of 50-50. Like an agent, an agent, there's advantages to having an agent there, it's not essential anymore, because especially with illustration, you can put your work online, on Instagram. It's so visual, and there's editors, art directors all over the world looking up, that way. So it's not an essential thing really to have an agent. And I'd say it's about 50-50, people who would really recommend an agent, and then people who say you don't really need, it's not like essential. So at the moment, I don't have an agent, no. Nice. Yeah, but I can see the advantages of, having somebody to be the go-between to approach the publishers for you, that would be great.
And sometimes as well, agents can also be the person fighting your corner in terms of, like Rob, you were saying about the all the different ideas that you were brainstorming and stuff. Sometimes the agent can be the person to be like, no, Rob, no. we're gonna do it this way, and then the publisher finds out, here's only the best ideas. What about yourself? Do you have an agent? And if you do, how does that benefit you? And if you don't, how have you found it?
Yeah, no, I don't. Like, I mean, like Katrina was saying, it was a very kind of organic process coming from kind of the work I was doing and then into the book. So that happened all very naturally. And because a friend of mine was working in the publishers, I had a kind of an existing relationship there. Now she kind of left halfway through. So the kind of need for an agent didn't really arise. But at the same time, having spent the last little while in that kind of publishing world a little bit and gotten to know it, I do kind of see how there could be advantages. And I'm possibly working on another book now, kind of a non-fiction book for adults about the philosophical dialogue process and teaching philosophy in marginalized communities and that kind of stuff. And it's been recommended to me a few times now that I might have another book on the way, that it might be a good idea to get an agent. And like, I definitely felt at times, because it was so new to me, a little bit in the dark about how the publishing kind of world works. And then throw COVID in on top of that, where you have delays and you have like no in-person events. And sometimes like I did feel a little bit unsure about when to push back or when to kind of challenge things, or when to say, well, actually, no, I'm not happy with that. And this could be small things, it could be big things. So it can be a little disorienting when you don't really know how things should go and how they're supposed to go, or when it's going well or when it's not going well. So having somebody to kind of even bounce things off, where you could say, is this really how this should go, or should this go differently, or should we push back a little here, or whatever, would be really helpful.
Yeah, of course. So you touched on something there, Rob, and we will get to talk about COVID and how it affected both of your book launches. But before we do that, just, was there anything then, so we've got to the point now in your stories where you're working with a publisher, you're submitting the ideas, you've got to the final draft after a year for you, Katrina, after a year and a half for you, Rob. What then? Like, how involved were you then from once you've given the final piece, you've done as well as you could, and you've given it to the publishers? How long then was it from then until publication day? And was there anything about that journey that surprised either of you, or maybe surprised you more, Rob, because Katrina, you you'd been there kind of before as the illustrator, but was there anything different as the author?
Yeah, I would say, Connor, the surprising thing about it was that it was to work with a publisher like O'Brien's. It's a lovely collaborative process that I hadn't really experienced before, and being the author and illustrator as well. So you like it is a kind of a solitary, you know, profession in one sense, but you know, having an editor and an art director, it was like, you know, you're all kind of on the same team, and you all kind of want the best version of the book, obviously, and it was just lovely to have, you know, people like that to bounce it off, and just to get a fresh eye, you know, on it. So I actually found it a really nice collaborative process. Then
Excellent. And then yourself, Rob, from the point of giving in the final manuscript to publication days tomorrow, like what has that been like?
So as far as I remember, the original plan, the book was supposed to actually be launched last year in September. So from, I think, the final submission, we had a bit of an eight-month period, I think, something like that, maybe 6 or 7 months, where, and then COVID hit, and that was all delayed, and so it was pushed back another 6 months. But so things like deciding on the artwork for the cover of the book, they would send me on like different drafts. They kind of took care of that side of things, but they would send me on like, what do you think of this approach? What do you think of this idea? And ask for feedback. And so that was one thing that we kind of worked on together, and also coming up with the name and the title for the book, which was left till the very last minute. But that was also something that I really valued their opinion on, you know, because they ultimately, you want the name to kind of help sell the book and be appealing to the right audience. And, you know, it can't be just what I envision it to be in my kind of dream scenario. So it was good to kind of get those ideas. So you take it out of just the pure, like, I want to make this as good as possible, into, well, you want to make it presentable to the right audience in the right way. And so that was really helpful to learn along the way.
So we've mentioned it enough now that I think we should actually address the virus-shaped elephant in the room. Book launches used to be a completely different, I don't say a completely different beast, but they used to be a completely different kind of way of life, and now they've changed. So has there been anything, I mean, obviously, Rob, you've already mentioned that the book was pushed back a couple of months. So, like, other than that, was there anything else frustrating or not irritating? That sounds really minor. Was there anything else infuriating about COVID slowing down or changing the book launch? Or are we kind of like, hey, we've been dealing with COVID for 18 months. We're kind of used to things being online.
No, I mean, like, and I said this before we were chatting, but like, relatively speaking, you know, anything about your first book coming out pales in comparison to what a lot of people went through in COVID. So, you know, it was like, I was delighted to have it coming out, and it was exciting, and it was, you know, it was definitely a kind of a good thing overall. But, you know, like the excitement of finding out that you have this kind of publishing deal and you're going to write your first book, and, you know, as someone who loves reading and who loves books, I was really, this was a great thing for me. I was so happy. And you imagine the launch, you imagine having your friends and family around in a room, and you talk and you share the story of the book. And it was definitely disappointing not to have that, without a doubt. And you imagine going into bookshops and going into schools and working with kids and signing books, and all that stuff was kind of was taken away. And like, we did our best with what could be done for online and on social media, and things like this are great. Like, you know, like to have a podcast like this is so good to give people a voice and a chance to tell these kinds of stories, because we're missing those things in real life. So I don't know if I'd say it was like infuriating, but it was disappointing that you kind of missed out on some of those opportunities, especially because I had never done it before, you know.
Yeah, I suppose.
There, Connor.
Yeah, Rob, in one way, I suppose maybe we were lucky because we'd nothing to compare it to. We've never had that, you know, the publication day and sharing it all with your family and friends. And even at this stage, like my publication day is September the 13th. And I mean, even still, it's kind of, we don't know how much can be in person at events and how much can't be, you know. But for me, it's funny, my year of working on this book really really coincided with the year of the lockdown, because my final deadline was in May. So it was like nearly from May to May. And I noticed, and I felt kind of lucky about this as well, Rob, like yourself, that I noticed, I was thinking about this, and I noticed that I only had the book to work on. Any other job I had got cancelled because of the virus. And I teach art to adults, that was all cancelled. So I only had the book, and I noticed that it actually gave me a different kind of focus, because I had nothing else, distracting me. I'd nowhere to go. Nobody was going anywhere, nobody was meeting. So I only had the book, and I actually really enjoyed having that time and space to focus. That would probably never happen again.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's funny you say that. I was kind of doing my last draft at the first couple of months of lockdown, and I had a very similar experience. It's like, grand, this is perfect. I'll just work away on this for a while.
Yeah. We were in one sense, we were lucky to have that time and
space.
Yeah. I think, and that's the thing. We do. This episode, we're recording it for those listening. It's the 13th of August, and by the time it'll air, Katrina's book will be out a while, because I think this is coming out late October. But it is one thing that I think everyone has had to do. We've had to just say, do you know what? COVID has happened. It's things are bad. We can't do this in person, but here's the positives that I can.
Yeah.
So apart from the time you both got to focus, was there any other positives to releasing a book in a COVID era? Was there any, Rob, you mentioned about getting to do podcasts and stuff that, let's be honest, you may not have done as many things like this if you were doing in-person events. So was there any other kind of small positives? You're like, oh yeah, this probably wouldn't have happened.
Do you want to go first, Katrina, while I try and take it?
I was going to say, do you want to go first? That's not chivalry. That's, I need to buy myself some time.
Yeah. Maybe I'll get some ideas from what you say.
Any other positives from working? I mean, that was just such a huge positive for me to have that experience about just having the time and space for focus. I learned a lot about focus and how distracted that I probably normally am, and pulled in different directions. But as well, another nice thing, I hope anyway, that I feel like, it was a tough year for a lot of people, and probably a confusing year for a lot of children, and maybe the books there's some little bit of escapism, or some little kind of bit of joy or escapism.
That's
I did hear that children's book sales were way up this last year during lockdown, I think.
Book sales across the board, just adults books, children's books, non-fiction.
And that is kind of encouraging, especially because obviously I'm sure time spent on screens was also up, but the fact that book sales went up means that people were looking for that kind of imaginative, proactive escape, where they're not just sitting back passively receiving things, but they're creating worlds themselves and doing so through books, which is
I think as well, a lot of children.
I
think kids are really screened out as well over the past year, and I think books are so tactile, that it's good. But I know I heard that as well about the children's books this year, especially in Ireland. It's like their highest sales ever, right across the board, except for textbooks, for school textbooks. Obviously enough.
What a shame.
No, it's not. But you're both right that one thing, I know we're drifting a little bit away from your stories as debut authors, but I think it's relevant. One thing I've noticed being a teacher, and all of my colleagues in my school, and I'm sure colleagues in other schools will agree, is that the break away from school has actually really benefited some children, and not necessarily the children you might think. I mean, I know coming back, because I've ended up just by coincidence teaching the same group of kids from 3rd all the way to 6th.
Wow. Nice.
Either as a class teacher or a support teacher, and it's been really interesting because I've seen children that really matured and really grew during the lockdown, and the most important thing was their confidence really soared. And I think it was a case of they got to
learn the way they wanted to learn and at their own pace. And then when it was the summer holidays, you know, when we weren't doing online teaching, they had spent so much time at home now that they were dying to do other things at home. And some of the boys were coming back saying, oh, I really love baking now. I'm really good. I can do this and this and this.
Wow.
And some of the girls were like, yeah, me and my dad used to play basketball every day and I'm actually really good now. You know, they got to explore things that, were they in school and were they doing their you know, their football training on Wednesday evenings and their hurling on Thursdays, swimming on Fridays, and their homework as well, that they wouldn't have had time to explore new avenues. So that is one other thing I think for children in particular, seeing as this is a podcast about children's writing, for children in particular, I think is really
yeah, that's lovely. Yeah,
no, it was great. So what have going back to your books, with bringing your books out and debuting it, what are some of the things that you have found really exciting and different, like to what you expected, I suppose, about bringing out a book? Now, I know it's your first book out as an author for both of you. So what was it like that, oh, wow, this is cool, I didn't think I'd be doing this as part of bringing a book out into the world?
This podcast. No, like it's really lovely to be able to chat to people about books. You know, that doesn't normally happen in my life. You know? So that's an added bonus. Yeah, the nice thing about it, I know I said this earlier, but I guess just the collaborative process that is involved in it is really nice as well. And I mean, I feel like I'm still at the beginnings. To ask me that in a few months' time, Connor, and I'll tell you about, you know.
We'll get you back for WonderPod next year. Like, well, we'll bring you back your bag.
But just to echo what Katrina said, actually, kind of becoming a little bit a part of the children's book community. You know, in a small way, it's a big community, and there's lots of people in lots of different ways that devote their lives to it. But it's a really cool and wonderful space. You know, people are great. Like, they're so enthusiastic. They really care about what they're doing. And I mean, it's such a positive thing to kind of bring into the world, whether you're, you know, a writer or a publisher or running a podcast or any kind of aspect of it. You know, if you're doing some work to promote the opportunity for children to read, that's great. And so just like I come, I suppose, from a kind of a more academic, philosophical background, and you know, it's quite refreshing for me to become part of this other community, and it's really fantastic. One other thing that I don't know if it was exciting, it was kind of half exciting, half scary, but it's like waiting for reviews to come out and like actually have other people reading your book. You know, like I was terrified about that happening, and then when someone says something nice about it, it's just so nice to hear that, like, okay, I'm not insane, I'm not the only person who thinks that this was a good idea. So that was something pretty cool to get some nice words about it from people you don't even know, you know.
What about you, Katrina? Have you had any reviews yet? Because time is weird, because as we're speaking now in real time, it hasn't come out yet, but by the time this airs, it'll be out a while. So
yeah, like I actually hadn't even thought of that, what you just said there, Rob, about reading the reviews. Like I'm a few months behind you. I've yet to experience that, but I would really agree with you about the whole children's book community, and this was a really unexpected bonus for me, that most people I have come in contact with through this experience, people in the children's book community, they're so welcoming and willing to share their information.
Really
which is lovely. It's something I didn't expect.
They're like, there doesn't seem to be like, there's like, you know, in other kind of worlds, there's a little bit of competitiveness and stuff maybe between people. Maybe I'm talking about academics again, but anyone I talked to or approached in the children's book world, other authors or people with or from other agencies or publishers, they're all just like, yeah, absolutely, I'll talk to you. Like, call me next week. I'll do whatever I can to help you out or give you some tips. Yeah, it's really great.
Yeah. What is it? A rising boat lifts all. What's that phrase?
Oh yeah,
a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
A rising boat is just something that's floating. Like,
but up there, boat.
Yeah. I'm gonna jump on the praise train as well, because I'm realizing we're all kind of at different stages in our children's writing journey. I mean, Rob, your book is out. Katrina, your book is done and on its way. I'm nearly finished my manuscript, but I haven't got it anywhere near a publisher yet or anything. So I have to agree with both of you. I mean, I've got involved with WonderFest, and WonderPod is my contribution to this kind of community. And there's one thing I on my other podcast, Story of a Storyteller, I had a guest, Joanna Penn, and she said something I think is really, really relevant, that some people worry that there's too many books or there's too many people writing books, and then, you know, how will my book ever sell? And she says, well, the more somebody writes, the more they end up reading. And I'm sure, Rob, as someone who wasn't involved in children's books before you started writing, I'm sure you've read children's books in the interim that you probably wouldn't have had before. And Katrina, same with yourself. I mean, before you started illustrating children's books, I'm sure you've come across one or two and looked at them, but you've never probably read them. And I think that's the thing we should all remember, that the more authors there are, every author is a reader first, and you'll never write as many books as you read.
I went on, like, when I first realized I was going to be doing this, I went on a crazy, like, kids book splurge. Like, I bought so many, like, all my old favorite ones, and then just ones that were popular at the time, and I had such a good time reading them. Like, that was one of the best parts of the process, was going back and reading all those books.
Yeah, it kind of, that's so true what you said. I actually never thought about that, because it's true. I experienced the same thing, because for years I actually didn't look at children's books, because maybe as an illustrator, I was coming at it from a visual point of view. I actually didn't want to be influenced by anyone else's style, so I purposely wasn't looking at children's books. But now that I have gone through the process of writing one, I have so much more appreciation for writers, and you know, the whole process and the craft of it, that I've probably read more children's books in the last year than I have in the last 10 years.
Than you probably did as a kid.
Yeah, exactly.
So guys, we're getting close to wrapping up now, but I have a couple of questions that I ask at every episode. And my first one is, when you both started your children's writing and illustrating careers, what was one thing that you wish you knew that you know now? Like, what was one thing you wish you could say, here, Rob of the past, do this instead of that, or Katrina, worry about that, don't worry about this? Like, what's the one thing you wish you knew before, when you started?
You want to go first, Rob?
He's deep in thought.
Your turn.
Typical philosopher, he doesn't answer straight away. He has a good think first. You know?
Well, I think one of the things is definitely that if you do want to write, the most important thing you can do, and the best way you can spend your time, is read as much as you can, and as many different, like, absolutely is essential. And it's really the only way you can kind of develop as a writer, both in terms of ideas and influences and styles, and even just in your kind of use of language. So, like, spending that few months before I started writing, delving into all of these classic children's books and kind of various different children's books was something that I found really beneficial. And I would definitely recommend that to anyone who's thinking about writing, is read as much as you can.
Excellent. What about you, Katrina?
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, I suppose from a practical point of view, I wish I had known, or I wish there was somebody out there who would tell people starting off about just the whole copyright thing. Maybe this is more of an illustrator's thing again, but just the whole copyright and contract thing. Like, we really do. We have a responsibility to educate ourselves about that. You know, you need to know about contracts and copyright, but there are organisations like Illustrators Ireland and the AOI, which is the English Association of Illustrators. They're really good, like, about contract advice and just all that kind of practical nitty gritty that writers and illustrators don't like having to look at.
We creatives do not like nitty gritty. My last couple of questions are rapid fire, so don't worry too much, Rob. Don't be going deep into your thoughts. Okay. Name a book that both of you wished that you had been the one to write or to illustrate.
Oh, I mean, there's so many, but one that springs to mind for me is definitely Philip Pullman's Northern Lights book. Like it just kind of
One of my
so
all-time
it,
favorites.
it's so deeply philosophical in the kind of ideas that it plays with, but it manages to not at all be condescending and kind of wrap that up in this amazing fantasy adventure story with great characters. Like it like at every level, it does what it's supposed to do. So I'd say that one.
Excellent. What about you, Katrina? A book you wish
Yeah.
you could illustrate, or a book you wish you wrote?
Yeah, so oh my gosh, I really wish I had written and illustrated any book by Beatrice Almagna. She's an Italian writer and illustrator. She lives in France, I think now. I don't know if you've ever heard of On a Magical Do Nothing Day. She wrote, it's so beautiful. It's about a child who has to put down her mobile phone and her technological games and go outside into nature when it's raining. And it's just like about how nature and the imagination can create this whole world of play, you know, away from technology. Yeah. So I just think it's such a lovely message, but visually her style as well, it like you can literally see her fingerprint on the paint and the brush stroke. It's so like her, you know, just to be able to have a voice like that visually as well as writing. So I wish that, yeah, I had written and illustrated On a Magical Do Nothing Day.
Excellent stuff. A mean question for you both now. If you have to choose only one that you can do from now on, reading, writing, and for you as well, Katrina, illustrating. If you can only do one of those things from now on, what would it be?
I mean, I'd have to choose reading, like, and it would be a painful choice, but there's no way I would deprive myself of like all the books I want to read. I mean, that's a long list. I'm going to be at that for a while. So yeah.
What do you think? Reading, writing, illustrating. You can only choose one.
Okay, if I had to choose one, I couldn't give up reading. Yeah. No way. No way. It's a lot more enjoyable than writing and illustrating.
That's for sure.
Excellent stuff. Guys, if anybody who is listening is really enamored with either of your fine selves, where can they find yourselves online, and then where as well can they get your books?
You can find the Philosophy Resistance Squad in most good bookshops and littleisland.ie. So Little Island are the publishers, and you can find me online on Twitter at @RobGrant_.
Excellent stuff. And Katrina, yourself?
Yeah, so my book should be in all good bookshops as well. And I know Dubray Books did the cover reveal. Dubray are kind of all over. They're Irish companies, and they're all over Ireland. They're in Galway too. And the publisher is O'Brien. And I am on Instagram. You can catch me on Instagram, just Katrina Sweeney. I'm not on Twitter. I haven't braved that yet.
You're better off staying off it, to be honest, I'd say. It's not good for the soul at all.
No, I'm going to stop you there. I think with all social media, you curate your own feed, and if you're liking things and reading things that drive up the bend, there's a block button for a reason.
Maybe so, but that takes a lot of work to fight against those algorithms. You know, really does. It's possible. I'm sure, though. You're right, Connor. Yeah.
Katrina Sweeney, Rob Grant, thank you both so much for coming on to WonderPod. It's been great to get to know you. Congratulations on your debut, and welcome to the children's writing community.
It was a pleasure, Connor.
It was a pleasure, yeah. And nice to meet you, Katrina.
Yeah.
Best of luck with the launch.
You too.
Thanks so much to Rob and Katrina for giving me the time and coming on to the show and talking to me and sharing their story with you guys. I think every episode so far I've said one takeaway I took, and the one takeaway from this chat with them is that there are lots of different ways to get into the publishing world, and just to keep trying and keep doing it in a different way. So thanks so much to the two of them for giving me, and I hope you listeners, a nice little glimmer of hope. While you're here, I think that, as Rob and Katrina have showed us, and indeed all my guests of the podcast so far have, is just how important creativity is. So with that in mind, might I suggest that one of our Inspire events on WonderFest is Creativity, the Mind at Play, with Oliver Jeffers, and he'll be talking with Mags Walsh It's on the 19th of November, so that's a Friday during WonderFest. And I think it'll be just an inspiration for aspiring creators, as well as maybe the little ones in your life too. For now, though, that's me. Tune in next week when I'll be talking with Patricia Ford and our current laureate Nanog, Anya Nicklin, about Irish and its pivotal place in children's literature. But until then, see you all next week. Thanks for listening. I hope you found this as useful, as inspiring as I did. Don't forget that WonderFest is happening from the 17th to the 21st of November 2021. Head over to wonderfest.ie to find out how else you can have a whale of a time. See you there!